businesses on the side. While I was at Berkeley, I forgot about this, I didn't mention this, I did a startup, it was called College Up, and it was Craigslist for colleges, and failed, thoroughly failed. I learned a lot from that, but then during Deloitte I actually did 2 small businesses, and then my application to MBA, to LBS, was entirely about, I want to do my own startup as in coming out of it, and that's entirely why I'm going to LBS. Because to get the basics of like marketing and finance that I just didn't get before. And then I got my current idea, Powr of You, because I've been thinking about it ever since I got to LBS, and even before, like what did I want to do? Because my 2 businesses were more, I would call them more small businesses, because my idea was not to scale them. Because usually startups, you're thinking about a scalable business, that you're looking for a model that you can actually grow from rather than just a small little aspect of it in your hometown or something. And the other businesses were much more smaller. One was a nonprofit consulting, and the other one was actually a tech support service. So I had a bunch of call centers in India that was running over 100K annually in terms of revenue through that. So Powr of You, we are essentially building a personal data marketplace. So you can actually monetize your online presence. So all this data that you're putting out there on social media, your website history, your apps that you're using, all this data that is being accumulated is being monetized by some people behind the scenes. Some of them are giving you a platform to engage on for free. So Facebook, Gmail, whoever else. But behind the scenes, analytics companies and other data brokers are monetizing this. So the idea is, if it's our data and we're putting it out there, why shouldn't we get paid for it? And that's what we're trying to build through this kind of, I'm not going to go into this very much detail. So taking the data, aggregating, anonymizing, creating reports that brands and agencies want to buy. Whatever money we generate, we revenue share back with you. So you monetize, and you can also learn about yourself as to what does this data say about you through insights that we have on the platform, on the website. Essentially, we're able to give you anonymity, cash back, as well as getting your insights, learning about yourself, while brands are getting more up-to-date across platform view and much more accurate information. They don't have to guess who the person is across things, but it's all in an anonymous manner. We have a good team working on it, and we're going to go on to the actual important things. So King asked me, and I told him I was very honored to be actually asked, because I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a successful entrepreneur. And that's, I guess, what my aspirations are a lot bigger in terms of I want to do bigger things with even Powr of You. There's a lot of applications that I've thought about, and even outside of that, of other ideas that I've just been kind of holding on to. But there are things that pretty much everybody runs into as when you're working on a startup that you guys are going to have to deal with. And some of them are here. If you're lucky, you may not have to run into some of these, and there's many more, but these are the ones that really stood out in my mind as the biggest ones that I would want to share with others. The very first one, and can please tell me about time if I am going over like 15 to 20 minutes max. Sure. Tell me to stop, because I want to open up for Q&A. Okay. So everyone is a critic. This is a really tough one, because anybody you share, and I'm sure you guys probably have worked on ideas or other people's ideas and you've shared them on with other people, or somebody has pitched to you and you're thinking, and you're listening to an idea, and you probably were thinking about Powr of You as well when I just pitched it to you. Everybody is a critic. Very few people take that first step of immediately saying, awesome idea. Everybody, the first thing they do is they think about why it will not work and what is wrong with it. And that's the first instinct that they have, and it's the first thing they tell you. And it's very hard when you listen to it, because you're putting your soul and your time and everything into it, and you hear somebody immediately criticize. And they're just like, well, what about this? What about this? And you're constantly listening to this barrage of criticism from everybody. Your colleagues, your mother, your parent, like whoever else you think about, everybody's talking about this. And anytime you pitch it, this is guaranteed people are going to say, well, what about this? And what about that? Did you think about this aspect of it? And often you probably have thought about a lot of these things if you're pitching it constantly. But there are questions that come up that you're dumbfounded, that you're like, oh, hey, I have not thought about it. And it hurts. The problem that comes up, it hurts because you're just like, oh, man, they don't like the idea. And you take it as a personal offense, and that's really hard. And you have to kind of push through it. So initially when I first started with it, I mean, I'm coming from consulting, so a lot of the clients are always, they don't like us around because they think we're going to fire them. And so a lot of times they'll say things that are very hurtful all the time, like when you're working with them. And it helped coming into this with that, but it was still very difficult because you get so excited about your idea, you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing in the world, and it's gonna work, and everybody's gonna love it, anybody I tell is gonna love it. And then you go tell that first person or that third person, and you're just like, why don't you get it? Like, why aren't you getting it? I get it, and I think everybody else should get it because it's so amazing. But it's not like that, because you're thinking, the way we think about it is from a certain frame. And we have thought about it for a longer period of time. You've researched it. Other people have not. And and usually people do go on the critic side, because not everybody is very forthcoming with giving out compliments to other people. And so people think about immediately, well, why will it not work? And the way, and I'm going to try and tell you how each one of these is actually, and you can turn it to a positive in terms of helping yourself. And it kind of takes the wind out of your, kind of your flight, and you're thinking, oh, it's amazing, I'm going to keep going. But the way you can take it is, one, if there's questions that you haven't thought about, absolutely take that in and say, okay, I've got to think about it. The other side of it is, think about all the different questions that people keep asking you, and if there's ones that keep coming up, that really goes more to tell you about how you're pitching the idea. Those are things that people constantly are not understanding about your idea, and that means those are concepts that are not given. Those are not standard beliefs that exist out there. So you should be looking at that internally for yourself and how you pitch your idea to other people. And it's an ongoing process. It happens all the time, but you really have to take that step back, because it's not a personal assault, even though it feels like that. And honestly, it feels like that even now when people question it. Because you're like, come on, please get it. I know it's true. I know these facts exist out there. Resources are always scarce. We are self-funded at the moment, so my current business is self-funded, and it is one that requires investment. Meaning we've actually put in about $60,000 ourselves from my savings. And as we just mentioned, I just finished my MBA, and it was entirely on my own money as well. When I say my own money, it was government money, so it was loans that I've taken on that continue with me. They have not gone away. Unfortunately, Obama has not waived them yet. But hopefully that happens soon. But essentially what comes up is resources, and I'm talking about money right now, but there's time. There's people, because not just your time, but other people that are coming in. There's resources in terms of mentors. Everything is always very scarce. In a startup environment, unless you're very lucky and you have people just left and right supporting you, and there are, obviously I'm not from a wealthy family, so let me clear that up. So it's not like this is all money that I've earned over time. I started when I was 14, I worked at McDonald's. And so I've been working since I was 14, and so this is money, obviously not from McDonald's, but from Deloitte or wherever else. They didn't pay me that well. So it's over time, but it's entirely out of my own savings that I'm working on this. And that money aspect is really limiting, because there's a lot of things you can do with money in terms of advertising or marketing your idea out there, or getting other experts to work on it for you. But always think about it, even if you have a lot of resources, especially from the money side or even time side, if you go from the perspective that you're actually limited, you will make better decisions. Because if you have too much of something, you will try and explore a bajillion things. And you will try and honestly, even though I am limited right now, I have a whole list of revenue ideas from just Powr that I can go over, that I want to pursue. But I can't, because I'm I don't have the money to do it. And often I'm like, oh, if I earn money, if I get funding, I'm going to do it. But at the same time, actually, no, that's not the right thing to be doing. Because you need to focus. At a startup level, you need to focus on a certain aspect of your model, and you need to pursue that all the way through. And see if you can prove it. If not, then you go to the next one. If not, then you go to the next one. And even now, I have the tendency of because the doubt comes up, because you're like, oh, I don't know if it's going to work. So you think about, oh, let me explore this other part of the model. Because you think, oh, maybe this will, if I bring both of them up at the same time, if one of them falls, I can just do this one faster. That's not how it works, because your mind is not thinking about that one very well, and you're actually going to be losing out, because you might give up on something that actually could have worked if you spent more time on it. Roller coasters. I think a lot of people say, oh, startup life is just like a roller coaster. It's actually a lot worse than a roller coaster, because roller coasters end. They actually stop at a certain point. This never ends. This goes on and on. And I'm feeling it right now while I'm talking to you guys, because I'm thinking, oh, wow, what are they thinking about my startup? And I'm talking, and what are they thinking about me, obviously, but did they understand Powr View? What are they thinking about it? Will they sign up? Will they hate it? Will they listen to it? They're going to make fun of it later? This is something you constantly feel, and if you compound that with everyone's a critic, it's a really difficult thing to go through. I'm somebody who doesn't necessarily emote very well. I don't go around expressing my emotions to everybody. And it's something I realized a good 2 months ago when I was just feeling this, I was feeling something and I didn't understand what it was. And then I was just, I think I was in London at that point, so I think we were in Bath at that point. And I just realized I had some time off, and I was thinking about it, I was like, I think I finally get it. I know what I'm feeling. I'm feeling constantly excited and constantly scared all the time. And it's this constant feeling of like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go. So it's like if you're locking me down in one place and I feel like I'm going faster, like I'm gonna move forward, but I'm just locked down. And I feel like I'm being limited, I'm held back. And it's just my own doubt of like, oh, is it gonna happen? Is it gonna happen? And that scares me. But I'm also super excited because I'm like, I really, really believe in this idea. I really think it can happen. I really think it's make a huge difference in what is going on outside in the world. And we can change the whole data economy. And I really believe that, but then this constant fear of, well, will it happen? Will people really get it? Will I make it? And will other people not ridicule me? If it doesn't happen, what will happen from that? And understanding, will we get funding? Can I survive long enough to get funding? Do I need to go do something else so I can keep this going? And these are things that are constantly going on in your mind, and it's extremely overwhelming. And one important thing is to recognize that for yourself and have somebody around you that you can talk to about it. And you probably want to have a couple people because it is very scary and you might overwhelm that one person and they're going to get tired of just listening to the same, I was going to swear, same stuff over and over and over again because they're just like, dude, if you just stop, if it's that scary, they just stop. But that's not the case. It's just because it's just something you will feel constantly. And my startup is with my sister, actually. She's my co-founder. And it works out really well. We were talking about this a little bit. I mean, the trust part of it is a huge factor in it. And being able to trust somebody else with that is really, really important and actually takes off a lot of the stress that comes along with it. And so that's why we were talking about how often the people that you end up working with are roommates or really good friends that you have on there. I mean, there's challenges with that because you can ruin friendships with that as well. But the big hurdle of, is the other person's interest that they have in mind in line with what I have in mind? And that's a really big part that you want to that hurdle you want to get over very early on when you build the team, in terms of saying, what would an exit look like for you? Would you be okay with just selling out as soon as you can? Or are you somebody who is really invested in building this business out all the way, or IP, or whatever else you want to go with it? But those are things that you constantly feel, and that's a really good, like having my sister as a co-founder really takes away from that, and like that stress of it. But there are other things in terms of making sure, because then you think about, okay, well, I have to make sure that I don't say anything that offends her, in the sense that we have to balance each other out. And we really do complement each other, but there are other times when if she's stressed out, I can't be stressed out, and if I'm stressed out, she can't be stressed out. Because, I mean, we're family, so we're always around each other as well. And so it really, you can't get away from that. And that's why often they say don't do a family, but it works really well with my sister, so I'm all for that. You don't have the answer. If you think you have the answer, you're in the wrong profession, because that's a basic premise of startups. Because if you know the answer, you're not doing it right, because you're looking at it too narrowly. Because you need to expand your vision of what you're looking at, all the questions you're trying to answer. Because if it was that straightforward and you have it based on whatever level of experience that you have, that means somebody else already has it and they've already thought about it. It doesn't work, or some other aspect of it. So don't ever assume you have the answer. And there's another aspect of it in saying, I have been working on this for over 1.5 years now. And I'm not, mind you, I'm not from marketing or market research background, so this space is marketing and ad tech and all that stuff. And I'm learning a lot day to day. And there's things that we get to, as I said, when you feel like, oh, I really get my idea, I know how it's gonna work, I know exactly what I need to tell people. But literally every single day, I learn something new, and it changes my perception of what I'm talking about. And it changes my perception of the landscape and how we fit into it. Sometimes in a very positive way, saying, wow, this is shifting, this whole thing is shifting, and we can fit in extremely well here. Other times it's like, holy crap, that's really bad. And then you go in and you research it more, you go look into it more, and then you're like, okay, what is bad, what is good about it? But you have to have that open mind of saying, I don't have the answer, and I need to talk to people, and I need to understand, and I need to research. And that applies to even when you're talking to people that you're working with. Because sometimes suppose you have interns, we have interns that work with us, and we'll ask them to do a certain role. Like it's an analytics thing, I'll say, we have this Twitter data set, analyze for this, and believe this is what's going to be out of it. And they'll come back and they say, okay, we don't have this, and with the data set I got to, these are the insight I got to, and it doesn't agree with what you just said. If you're fixated on saying, because the way you come up with this hypothesis is something that validates what you believe in, what you believe the result is going to be, and that's how you come up with your hypothesis. And if it comes up something that completely contradicts what you want to believe in, is really difficult to reconcile if you are not willing to open up to that. And this applies to one of our model is revenue share. So this is something that really came about for us. Our model is revenue share now. It used to be profit share. We thoroughly believed, hey, we are very honest people. Everybody would believe that we are not going to unfairly allocate costs to whatever we're doing, so that we only give a little bit of money back to people. And we were completely on board with this, and we did this for a good 8-9 months until we started hearing this. And it was like, firstly, it was like an investor we were talking to, and then other people mentioned it. And it took a good 2 months for us to realize, we're like, wait, we really shouldn't be saying profit share. Because you're right, even though we have the best of intentions in mind, and we are not planning to screw people over, being the consumers, like giving money back to the consumers, the perception out there could be completely different. What you see of that is very different, because you might get a report saying, oh, we sold a report for $10,000, and we took out $8,000 in costs for this, and $2,000 for this, and you basically got nothing, and you don't know why that happened. And so we said, okay, and this is, the other people kept coming to us and saying, you really should shift. But it took us a good 2 months to realize we really need to move away from that. And it was a big step for us, because it changes our financial modeling and everything, how much money and how soon we can generate the revenues, our profit making and all that. It changes everything. And it was a very difficult thing for us to get to, but it was a very important step, because then the conversation we're having actually went away from this conversation as much of like, well, how much are your costs? Like, what are you doing here? What are you going to give it back? It actually moved away from that, and it helped us a lot in our conversation. We're like, oh, we believe in transparency, and we're actually living by it. We are following that in our revenue model, even though it hurts us a lot in the short term. None of you guys are consultants, actually, so there's only 4 bullet points, and one of the things you learn is it's usually 3 to 5 bullet points. You'd never go for an even number. It throws things off. The reason I intentionally did that is because you never know what's going to come around. You will not see the things that are going to come out at you from left and right. You will not see sometimes your competitors coming, them changing their own model to fit into what you're doing exactly. A big company stepping into your space. So you really need to be prepared for the unexpected. And it's not saying that you have like 50 different models built out of saying, okay, if this scenario is built out of saying, this happens, I'm going to do this happens, then it's really about the agility of saying, and being, again, the open thing of saying, okay, this is happening, not freaking out, not saying, oh my God, what are we going to do? But it's just taking it, how has the landscape changed? What does this mean for me? How does this change what my proposition is? And what do I need to do to distinguish myself or continue sticking by what I'm doing? We have a competitor in the space that is focused on, and they're doing more payment on a monthly basis. They'll give you a certain amount on a monthly basis rather than a revenue share. And we learned about this at a much later point than when we started the idea. And it seemed like the question that kept coming up for us, and people kept asking, well, how much are you going to pay back? Like, how much are you going to give us? And we have trouble with that answer, because honestly, we don't have an exact number in mind, because until we sell a report, until we prove that model, we can't tell you we're going to give you this exact number. But we were very much dedicated on the fact that, hey, it's a community. We are trying to build a movement together, not that you are just a plug-in to our business. That just like how you are now, they're just using you and just giving you some things in return. We wanted something where people would be joining with us. And really, when that information came out, people were like, oh wow, you're going to give me this fixed number on an ongoing basis. That's great, I know the amount I'm going to get. And we're like, well, that does make sense, but then it adds a fixed cost to a startup level where we don't really have that much money to begin with. And the other side, it goes against what we believe in. It goes against what we're trying to build in our startup. And it took us to actually like sit there and think about it quite a bit, and we were like, no, we stick to what we're doing. Even though it's a little more unclear and a little more ambiguous in the beginning, and people won't understand it right away in terms of the direct monetary benefit to them, but it is what we are trying to build, and you go with it. And even though we don't know what the future holds along the side, we'll see. But that's, we follow our principles on that. Okay. that was helpful in some things. I'm sure a lot of these things you guys hear all the time, so I want you to ask me questions that you either don't get answers to, or it's something that you've thought about in more specific that we just don't talk about, or the articles don't talk about. Please.
So what was the first step that you did to get started? You had your idea, were you with your sister? How did that get started?
As soon as this idea happened, April 11th, 2013, 2:38 p.m. GMT, in front of Baker Sea Station. I remember because I literally stood there, I had my backpack on, even in MBA we wear backpacks, and the question was, why don't we get paid for our data? And I'd been talking to my sister as well about like startups in general, and so I immediately called her up, and she's like, well, no, it went to voicemail, I emailed her, and then we talked after, and she's like, well, where are we going to get the data? I said, APIs, and who do we sell it to? We got to figure that out. And that was it. And so we started from there, and we said, okay, what are the things we need to prove, understand for ourselves in order to have a full model, or like actual business model around it? And that was when we started, my sister is from consulting as well, and she was working with CPG firms. And so at that point, she was looking, and she was already working with some top brands, and seeing that they had trouble in terms of understanding consumers. And we said, okay, well, if that's something that's already missing, why don't we connect that together? And so we just kept researching more and more. We also had a little bit later down the line, we had one of my colleagues from my MBA. She was a Nestle and Johnson & Johnson background. And she actually was like, guys, this is awesome. People would love this. And they would really, like, this data is amazing if you can put it together. Does that answer?
Yeah.
So it's really about understanding the model before you start building from scratch.
Right. So your guys' past experiences really helped you develop.
It did, absolutely did, yeah. But the key thing there, though, I kind of was mentioning, I'm not from, again, marketing or market research background, so we had to understand that space, and we continue understanding that space now. It's extremely complex, and that applies to any other space that you work in. Maybe even AI, actually, like AI is very new, but I would say even then it's super complex about what's going on in this field. So if you're working in a new area, you can do it. I believe you can do it. There's a lot of rhetoric out there saying you can't. I believe you can, because you bring a new perspective to it.
You mentioned that everyone is a critic, and actually I have an idea to create a social app for mobile phones at the end of my high school. So, I want to know how many people actually agree with your idea and think that your idea is a good idea, and how many people say that it's kind of stupid, and how do you deal with them?
Luckily, at the moment, I haven't had anybody say my idea is stupid. That would have hurt a lot more, unless you just called my idea stupid. Maybe that's what happened, but that would be the first. But in terms of critic, I would say I think in percentage-wise, I think probably 2% of people are immediately like, that's great. I've spoken to a lot of people, so 2% is not like 4 people. It's a lot. I speak to a lot of people about this, and 2% of people immediately are like, this is great. And a lot of them, I include the marketing, the agencies and things like that, people who get the space really well, and who are buying the consumer research already. But I would say the 98% of people are, honestly, they just doubt it. They immediately like, well, why would I want to give up my data? Aren't they getting it for free? And all these other things that come along with it. But it's true, because in a pitch, in a short pitch, you're not going to be able to explain everything, right? So you want to get that message across, and you have to be accepting of the fact that you haven't been able to tell them everything. And it's hard to do, because you're like, you should have just gotten it. Like, why didn't you get it? I told you everything already. So
are you afraid of your ideas being stolen by others when you pitch them?
That's a really good. Initially, when I started, honestly, I was actually really afraid of that, because in a way, my idea is very replicable. It's something that other people can do. You guys can go out and do it as well. But what I realized very quickly is, and talking to other people, and talking to actually even professors at LBS, it's not, and you will hear this, it's the execution of the idea. It's actually not just the execution. There's another part between having the idea and developing that idea, that middle part, developing it. The idea grows legs. Sounds creepy. But it's like spider or caterpillar, whatever you want to call it. It moves faster than a caterpillar. But it grows legs, because the more people you talk to, the more you can develop that idea. And so it started with this basic model of why don't we get paid for our idea, right? Paid for our data. That by itself is not much. Then building onto that whole profit sharing and then revenue sharing later on, building onto the idea of insights, sharing something back with the users. How do we do the branding? How do we explain what we're doing? Because it's not something that people get right away. Maybe in the Bay that we do, like we constantly get it. And a lot of people, it's a lot easier to explain it to people here. But then in London, things are still shaping up. Tech is still not that big. And so all these things that the more people we spoke to, the more we realized that, no, you can't do this way, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way. And I know so one thing I will say, in the Bay, it's a lot more saturated in terms of there's so many more people like just hungry for ideas, hungry to build. But ultimately, if you're having that many conversations and you're trying to shape the idea still, if it's not just simply like, oh, I'm just going to build, somebody can go on and shoot whatever, like it's the trash can one, like the paper throwing one. Oh God, I can't think right now. Yeah, paper toss. If it's not something as simple as that, not that that is super simple because you can gamify that in different ways. Unless it's something like that, outside of that, pretty much every idea has so many elements of it, and nowadays simple ideas don't work. They just don't work. You have to have so many other elements. Just like I said, you have to gamify it because people are inundated with so many apps out there. So you will have to find a way to distinguish. And that you will learn by talking to a lot of people, maybe people who are in your space already. Right? So some of the things we learned about Powr was talking to people who worked at a competitor before. Luckily worked at a competitor before. And actually the person had done something, was thinking about something very similar to what we were doing to implement there. But they just weren't receptive, it wasn't fit for their business. So that was a good validation for me. And you might realize like, hey, this other company couldn't do it because they were too big at a certain point. Or this game just didn't work with that. So having more conversations is actually more helpful.
Did you find lawyer when you started?
Did you say lawyer?
Law consulting. Like, because, I think when you start a company, it just, there's always something that you are not sure whether it's legal or not.
I think the mentality here is more so just build and you can apologize later if it happens. I think that we did a lot of research ourselves and saying, okay, well, let's try and read through it. There's things we missed. Absolutely, I'm not going to say we didn't. We learned about them later on. But again, some of those things we learned by having the conversation. Because we talked to some people who are in the space and they're like, and even conversations I've had with people here, some seniors and even juniors working on ideas, and I told them, I was like, they were talking about a social app, and I explained to them, well, do you know the limitations of the APIs that you're working with? Because I'm working with them right now, I know the limitations that I have to work with. They had never worked with them before, and they were like, oh, wait, I never thought about that. And I didn't even know that was the case. But you know that, you basically learned from my knowledge and my experience. So the more people you talk to, and hopefully maybe even more senior than you can actually learn a lot from that, rather than them stealing your idea. Because honestly, people have so many ideas. I have 2 other ideas right now that I'm like, they're not that complicated, but I don't have the time, I can't code it myself. And so nobody has time, honestly, these days to actually do that. Because it's not just, if you're a developer yourself, that's great, because you can just build it, and another developer is probably like, oh, I build it, but I don't really get the whole thing. How would I market it? Because you had the idea because either you had a need, or you saw somebody else have a need, or something associated with that. So you have an idea of how you would market this idea as well. Other people don't, and they have to think about all of that. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
So, no problem.
How have you marketed Powr?
We actually have not marketed Powr very much. I've been in London all this time. Most of my MBA friends know about it. Excuse me. Most of my MBA friends know about it. I actually haven't invited them onto the platform either. That's going to happen sometime this week because we're just kind of building up the platform on our end. So on our current, when we were in private beta, we had, I think, I want to say 80 people or something. We went live, like open live, a little bit ago. We didn't advertise on Facebook. I have not asked any of my friends on Facebook or any on Twitter, wherever else, to join in. We currently have a little over 200 people. These are people just kind of finding us on different articles that we've been featured on, other awards that we've won, and they're just kind of coming on by themselves. But the marketing is actually going to happen now. Maybe this is a marketing effort for myself as well. So please join and sign up when you guys can. If you're interested, check it out, ask me questions, whatever that you want, if you're not sure about it. But it is something we are doing now where we're coming up with a strategy in terms of how would we approach the college campuses. How would we approach, let's say, if it's moms? It's a very hot, that's It's a very sought after segment by marketers. That's a better way to put it. And so we would be trying to bring them on board, and we're trying to figure out what exactly would we do to do that. We have had a conversation from marketing perspective, from a brand side. We have had a ton of conversations on that end. I'm constantly meeting people and saying, oh, can you introduce me through this? So that's where your network comes into play as well. So the more people you talk to, the more people will be like, oh, I know somebody working on that idea, or if, like whatever the app may be, and they might see an application of that in what they're doing, but they don't have the time to build it. So now you just made a connecting point that you can actually go work for them. You have your first customer right there. So more people you talk to might get referred on. So I did the Berkeley method of entrepreneurship here. I just did the boot camp on it. And the intention was I hadn't worked in the startup arena here, and it was a good way for me to get to meet people. And I actually had quite a few introductions there that I'm still following up with and continuing, and potential customers was.
Same thing with the time at Deloitte.
In what?
Network.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Partner. I met with one of my managers for dinner a week and a half ago, or 2 weeks ago, and then he apparently talked to, and he went to Duke for MBA, and he told me about a couple people already. I got invited to a happy hour that he was holding, and he introduced me to a bunch of people there. Great network there as well. So I don't have access to the Duke network, obviously, until I met with him. And then Deloitte network, he met with one of the partners I used to work with. And the partner emailed me saying, hey, I know you're working on this. Can we talk about it over coffee? The network is very, very important. Sorry, this is not in a moment of, I know this is Q&A, I'll just add one thing. Networking gets a really bad name. It has a really bad connotation, but that's because people approach it in the form of, it's an action I have to do that I'm being forced to do. That you have to go out and just meet a ton of people. That's not what networking is. Truly, if you're good at networking, I'm not claiming that I am, but if you really want to be good at it, you have to be genuinely interested in getting to know people and getting to know their story. Because if you're just self-interested and you're like, hey, how can I fit into, that's not how networking works. It's about getting to know people, because if you don't truly connect with them and they don't relate to what you're doing and what you're trying to build and who you are, they will not make that introduction on. That's not you expanding your network, that's just you knowing another endpoint, which doesn't add any value to you. Yeah, sorry, that was outside of the context of here. I've been having this conversation with a lot of people like, oh, I hate networking, or oh, you network well, or whatever else. It gets a really bad name for no reason. Sorry, just real.
How did you build your team to develop the initial platform?
So very first one, the private beta one, actually, we had a friend of my sister's from her work that helped us do it. Incredible guy, somebody we have in mind right now. He's not working with us anymore. He had another job that he was working in, and it was too busy with it. And his wife said no. So it just was a time constraint. But somebody we have in mind would love to have him back. It was just more of a necessity-based thing. We needed it done. We had to find people who would be willing to do it. Somebody who we knew we could trust with building it, and we just kind of reached out to our network to find somebody, and that's who we got to. And in terms of other members of the team, so outside of the development team, it was conversations, actually. Talking to a ton of people, even here at PBL, I was part of PBL when I was on campus. I spent quite a bit of time with them. And most of my friends that I follow up with in terms of dinner or whatever when I come back to California is actually my PBL folks. And so even in talking to them and the other people I spoke at the general meeting, other people approached me about doing internships. So building a team actually came from that as well. So we have people at UCL, it's University College of London, they have a good tech program in London. And we have interns from that. And they introduced me to other people, and one of the interns introduced me to another friend of his, and this other guy's like, oh, I know other people would be interested. So it just getting people, but the people don't just join for the sake of joining. You have to talk to them, and you have to inspire them with, not saying I'm inspiring, God, that was the wrong thing. You have to get them engaged in what you're building, in terms of, hey, I have this vision that I'm trying to get to, help me get there, and so we can get there together.
So are you based in England?
At the moment we are, but given that was my point of visiting here and kind of seeing, but I live, this is home for me, meaning I'm about 20 minutes east of here in Pleasant Hill. So my family and my home, everything is here. So I knew the reason I went to LBS was one, it was international. The other side was if I didn't leave the Bay, I would never leave the Bay. Because there's no reason to leave it. It's amazing here. We have everything. But yeah, we're planning to actually move back potentially. Not 100%, it depends on money, you know. Say that again?
I'm an exchange student from the University of Leeds.
Oh,
So,
okay, nice. I actually had a project in
I'm going
Leeds.
back to England in August, on that, yeah, after summer.
Okay, cool. Well, we should talk. I mean, if there's, I can give you tips around there as well in terms of other startups.
Is it better for one person to know the coding side and the business side, or is it better to have it spread out? Because there's always the fear of the developer was stealing your idea and making something by himself.
I don't have a great answer for that because I'm not a coder myself, and like hardcore coder. I can understand all code. I take care of a lot of the team. My sister and I both know coding. We've done quite a bit of it ourselves, but we can't build from bottom up. So it's difficult for me to answer that question, and I haven't seen a situation where somebody has run off with a code. But it does create tension within a team when you're trying to. That's why I was saying earlier, get to that point where you have that understanding of, are you willing to sell out when the first opportunity, and some of those kind of key points of decision making that come up. You need to understand where you stand on that. Because if you don't, there's a higher risk that person will run off with the code. Other thing you can do is you set up a company and you assign the code to the company. So within PowerView, everything is intellectual property is signed over to PowerView. None of us own the intellectual property. Does that make sense? So, and then it becomes whatever the company holds. So if you both own the company, you own somebody else, and the code is actually assigned to the company, they can't run off with the code. Does that answer your question? So that's another way to bypass it. It does create more bureaucracy for you because you have to then go through all the paperwork and stuff like that, and that's where all this trust thing comes in. Finding people that you trust that you feel like won't do it. Yeah.
Just to add on to that, so would you say in terms of the preference that you don't have experience in yourself, you know, when is it that you would actually go out and learn it? Let's say you don't know coding, like, should we actually go out and learn coding ourselves so that we don't have to have that worry, or do we not invest that time into that so we just focus on this model?
Depending on what your skill set is. So I actually love coding, but I cannot spend the time learning it now. It's far too late for that. You guys are, I'm not that old, I really am not that old, but you guys are much earlier in your career. Like, I would say if you have the time, learn at least some coding. As I said, I do know some coding. I can understand all languages out there, but I can't code it myself. So I would say everybody should have, at this point in time, especially if you're looking to work in anywhere, even associated with, but everything is associated with tech, never mind. You should learn some basic coding, fact. Like, just learn some basic coding. And it's not even that you actually have to write a bunch of like really complex programs. The fact that I'm saying I can read all programs, that's a huge asset, because some of the people that some of the developers we were working with, they didn't even know I didn't code for like good 8 months. They had no idea I couldn't code. And because they would come to me with questions and I would tell them, hey, this is how you should do it. And they're like, okay, then they go do it, and it made sense to them. But that's because I had that kind of basic understanding of how the languages work. And so I would highly recommend every single one of you guys get some experience in it. There's Code Academy, there's so many things out there. Get some experience in it, but if it's not your primary skill set, don't try and spend too much time to become an experienced person at it. It does not add much value. Find somebody, I know it's difficult, believe me, I struggle with this because of the other ideas, whatever I had before. I struggle with this, but at the end of the day, there are things that we're really, really good at, and other things we're just not that great at, or will not be because it takes a certain other amount of time to do. Go for it. Oh, sorry, go for it.
Yeah. Do you think you could have done this without your MBA, or do you think that the MBA gave you like a specific insight and more skills, networking?
I think, well, there is a lot of rhetoric saying that MBA is absolutely useless if you're trying to do a startup and entrepreneurship and stuff. But I think that applies, and I'm not trying to give you a cop-out answer, I think it is really dependent on the person. For me, I knew I was missing certain things around marketing, thought process around marketing, what the basics of it. I did some courses here, but it was a while back, and I didn't really retain it that well because I didn't know if it was relevant or if it was actually going to be helpful. So it was more like I knew there's certain things I needed that I definitely got during the MBA. The network was invaluable. Even in our idea right now, it's really, really helpful. But the other side of it is that break depending on where you are in your career, if you are working day and night on a job, you might not actually have the time to take that break and think about what exactly, like, what is going on with the world? What do I want to do? So it's actually a very nice break to have, very fun break to have. I would do 2 more years if I could. To have if you are in a role where you are just working day and night. And consulting, that's what we do. We are working day and night, that's what our job is. And so from that perspective, it was really, really valuable for me. Because it's not like I had the idea beforehand, and it's not like the MBA actually helped me build it up. I really got the idea in just the time I had it off. But I cannot guarantee I wouldn't have had it even if I was outside. Or I might have just been busy doing other things and I just wouldn't have thought about it at that point. So it really does come down to individually, what are you going to gain from the MBA? Because if you're not going to gain much in concrete things that you think you want, I would say don't do it.
So did you receive any resources from the university when you were like developing this idea at the beginning? Like, I don't know, funding, I don't know, like they have like a business incubator here at the Haas that can actually give you money, or I don't know if you got those same resources.
Yeah, so London, the UK scene in general for startup is very, very young. Outside of the US, it's the most developed and it's coming up fast. But compared to the US, we're very, very far away. I say we, it is a home for me actually, yeah, it is home. But we did have a London Business School incubator, actually was really, really helpful in many ways in giving the structure at oftentimes that we didn't necessarily know about. Because I had done my own businesses before, like my sister had worked on other things before as well, but sat on on nonprofit boards and stuff. So we know about strategy, we know about like getting shit done. Getting things done. So we understand that part, but oftentimes there are certain entrepreneurial concepts, or just like the lean methodology is just one of the things that goes around that people talk about a lot. But there are other things that are just simple questions that I was mentioning to King, like that you guys should like spend a session on or something when you're evaluating ideas, that I think that we had from the London Business School incubator and the network that they brought in and the speakers that they brought in, that we wouldn't have had outside of that ourselves. So participating, I think Berkeley just recently launched the Free Ventures. That was another one that just launched. There's other incubator type things, or even just like something like this, where it's just bringing together people who are thinking about the space, thinking about startups and the challenges that you have, or even the opportunities that you have out there. I think getting that support network is really, really important, and even from that whole emotion management perspective. Because you might see somebody else who's like raging about something, and you're like, "Oh, dude, I totally understand," and you go talk to them. So.
All right, one more question, so you can choose.
Go for it.
Come back to the idea of network, because I grew up in China, and actually from China to here, I know many people, and it's kind of hard for me, to keep in touch with all my friends. I mean, I'm asking that do you think it's more important to know as many people as you can, or just focus to a certain group of people that you think that you guys share a passion with? For example, we are all interested in entrepreneurship, or just you just try your best to know all people?
Cool. That's I definitely cannot. There's no answer to that question. Sorry, I know that sounds really bad to say that, but there is no answer to that question, because then I would be dictating how you interact with people. I can't answer that question. I will say there's a limit. 150 is the limit of the number of people you can have close connections with. Fact, like this has been proven. Average people, and that's just how it works. In terms of choosing people you should interact with, no, because if you work with only a homogenous group of people, your mindset is going to be limited to those group of people. So often I think that one of the problems that they say by engineers is they are so focused on just building something, they don't think about the actual application of it. Business side, you might not think about like, oh, how difficult maybe it is to build, or like other elements of it. So bringing all these different things together, industry expertise. As I said, I'm not from marketing and market research background. Consulting is not like that. It's very disciplined. It's very much high level things. I needed people in that network to be able to reach out to them to actually understand that better. So if I was just focused on, okay, I'm only going to build my consulting huddle, and I'm only going to build my MBA huddle or whatever else, like I would have completely missed out on all these things on there. So again, I can't dictate how you behave with your friends with it, but I would say meet as many people as possible. But you want to have support network of like-minded individuals so you can bounce things off of them and they understand how you feel, what you're going through. Because if you have nobody in your network that's going through startup feel, like going through that journey, it will be tough. You will feel isolated because it is very isolating, even when you have your sister as a co-founder sometimes.
Please help me in thanking Keshav.